Undersea cables connect the world. Nearly 1.5 million kilometers of thin cables. They underpin global internet traffic. And they're vulnerable.
All our connectivity is effectively reliant on these quite thin kind of garden hoses that are laying there on the seabed.
And suspicious things have been happening here in the Baltic Sea, causing damage to those internet cables, but also power cables and pipelines connecting NATO states.
There is reason for grave concern.
Attacking this, undermining this backbone is part of the Russian military doctrine.
However, it's extremely difficult to prove.
So what's pointing to sabotage? And how is NATO reacting? Let's head to the Baltic Sea and join the Eagle S. The cargo ship took off from the port of Ust-Luga in Russia and made its way through the Baltic Sea. It crossed the Estlink 2 power cable that connects Finland with Estonia. That's when things started to get suspicious. The vessel slowed down near the power cable, and the Finnish electricity grid operator noticed a power outage. The Eagle S went on to cross these undersea internet cables. 3 of them stopped working properly around that time. Finnish authorities boarded the Eagle S and took it into custody. They recovered its lost and clearly damaged anchor. All that led them to suspect that the Eagle S had intentionally dragged its anchor over the seabed for around 100 kilometers in order to sever the cables. They were also suspicious because this had happened before. Just a month before the Eagle S case, 2 other undersea communication cables were damaged. One connecting Lithuania to the Swedish island of Gotland, and another connecting Finland and Germany. And again, a cargo ship was suspected of having dragged its anchor across the cables. All these undersea cables have been damaged in the Baltic Sea since 2023.
Niemand glaubt, dass diese Kabel aus Versehen durchtrennt worden sind.
Et jah, rünnakuks me võiks teda nimetada, et on tõesti meie eluliste struktuuride vastu täna.
Att fientlig avsikt inte kan uteslutas.
Another high-profile case. In 2022, the Nord Stream gas pipelines between Russia and Germany were damaged in explosions. Recent investigations have linked the incident to Ukrainian nationals. Ukrainian officials have denied any involvement in the explosions. What authorities do know for certain, this was deliberate sabotage, because they found traces of explosives. A lot of the incidents in the Baltic Sea are less clear-cut. Let's look more closely at where they are happening. The Baltic Sea is mostly bordered by NATO members. And this is Russia's Baltic Sea coast. Here's Kaliningrad. It's part of Russia and the headquarters for Russia's Baltic Fleet.
The Baltic Sea has become a focal point of military activities.
Katarzyna Zysk is currently a professor of international relations at the Norwegian Institute for Defense Studies, which is connected to the Norwegian Armed Forces. Her research has focused on Russian military warfare for the past 20 years.
The Baltic Sea is exactly where you have increased tensions, especially in the context of the Russian war in Ukraine and heightened tension between Russia and NATO.
Because the war in Ukraine also shifted the balance in the Baltic Sea. It led Finland and Sweden to join NATO, which means now almost all the countries around the sea are in the alliance. Both NATO and Russia are carrying out naval drills there, displays of military power for the whole world to see.
But there has been much less attention directed toward the vulnerability of the infrastructure that is on the seabed in the Baltic Sea.
All our connectivity is effectively reliant on these quite thin kind of garden hoses.
Katja Bego is a senior research fellow at the British think tank Chatham House. She's working on a book about what she calls the weaponization of undersea communications cables.
These were systems and kind of processes that were built in basically an era of peace dividend, right? So they were not designed with this idea of that you now have actors quite deliberately try to destroy them.
So these undersea communications cables were built for times of peace, and damage to them can have dramatic consequences, especially if there aren't many backup cables. Take Taiwan's Matsu Islands. They are in a geopolitically tense region, with China laying claim to Taiwan. Chinese ships have allegedly damaged cables connecting Taiwan's main island and the Matsu Islands several times. In 2023, islanders ended up mostly offline for weeks. Taiwan has since set up emergency backup systems. Of course, that and the incidents in the Baltic Sea could have been accidents and not sabotage. Because accidents and faults do happen a lot, up to 200 times a year. And the likelihood of an accident is particularly high in the Baltic Sea. It's shallow, and a lot of ships cross it every day. Kind of perfect if you want to make something look like an accident.
Governments in particular have been quite quick to point a finger at Russia in these cases. We might never actually be able to say it was definitely sabotage, right? Because, it's very difficult to prove intent. Yeah, well, we know that the damage happened, we know the ship that did it, but can you truly fully prove that a crew intended to do it? Or maybe there are cases of very incompetent seamanship is possible, right?
First, let's look at the means, those ships. Take the Eagle S. The ship is owned by a company in the United Arab Emirates. The crew is believed to be from Georgia and India. But it sails under the flag of the Cook Islands. Yep, it's all pretty confusing. And there may still be a link to Russia. In 2024, the Eagle S only transported Russian goods, including oil. It's allegedly part of Russia's Shadow Fleet. The Shadow Fleet is a group of often old and unregistered tankers. Russia uses them to get around Western sanctions on oil that were introduced following the country's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Plus, Russia has reportedly been spying on undersea infrastructure in the Baltic Sea.
They have been mapping the critical infrastructure for at least 2 decades very intensively. Reporting indicates that Eagle S was equipped with spy equipment capable of monitoring NATO ships and aircrafts.
Along with the means, there are the possible Russian motives.
Please activate the connection.
This might look like a game show, but it's actually the EU celebrating Baltic Energy Independence Day. That's when Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia joined the European energy system, becoming fully independent from Russia's grid. For years, the Baltic states dismantled Soviet-era power lines that connected them with Russia and Belarus. They mostly replaced them with, guess what? Underwater cables in the Baltic Sea. Which brings us back to the Eagle S again. The damaged power cable connected Estonia and fellow EU member Finland. And the damage happened around the time the Baltics were disconnecting from Russian power lines.
We cannot prove the intentionality. We cannot even prove with certainty that this was Russia, but these are these indications that Russia had an interest in potentially at least slowing down this transition, making it more difficult or even punishing the Baltic republics for trying to lower their dependence on Russia.
Russia denies any involvement in incidents in the Baltic Sea and having a shadow fleet.
Западники последовательно навязывают мировому сообществу такие вот мифы. Реальная цель этого всего – любыми средствами ограничить экспорт российской нефти.
But there's a bigger context to why NATO countries are often quick to accuse Russia. Russia's hybrid war. This map by US think tank Center for Strategic and International Studies shows alleged Russian attacks in Europe on critical infrastructure, industry, and transportation in recent years.
Attacking critical infrastructure has been part of Russian military doctrine at least over 15 years. When Russia be cutting cables or threatening other critical infrastructure, it could be showing, signaling, look, we have the capability, we can harm you. So basically trying to create fear, to create chaos, to scare the Western politicians, the broader societies.
Let's recap. Russia would have the means and the motives to carry out acts of sabotage in the Baltic Sea. But it's denying responsibility. And there may never be hard evidence. This was just a few weeks after the Eagle S incident, a show of unity from NATO's Baltic states.
NATO is launching Baltic Sentry.
It's an operation to protect the infrastructure in the Baltic Sea. NATO countries have stepped up patrols with airplanes and warships, like this Estonian Navy vessel. But the truth is, even if the Baltic Sea is quite small in comparison to other waterways, it's basically impossible to monitor all of it all the time. So the point of NATO's reaction is also to send a signal.
Ship captains must understand that potential threats to our infrastructure will have consequences, including possible boarding, impounding and arrest.
That's exactly what Finnish authorities did when they stopped the Eagle S and brought it into their own waters.
They did something that is technically not compliant with kind of international law, not really meant to bring a ship back into your own waters.
These are the territorial waters of NATO countries bordering the Baltic Sea. Here, the states have jurisdiction. But outside of them, in international waters, they can't interfere with foreign ships they deem dangerous. That's what makes reacting to suspicious vessels so tricky.
It's very hard for a democratic country just to act on a suspicion. Authoritarian and dictatorial countries certainly will be continue exploiting all the loopholes and the open nature of the Western societies.
We may never know if the incidents in the Baltic Sea were sabotage or just an accident. And ambiguity may be part of Russia's strategy.
These kind of tools are also part of the playbook in the Russian sort of quiet war, the war below the threshold directed at Western countries. Russia also may be wanting to test, what kind of reactions do they get.
There are discussions within NATO about that threshold. At what point could damage to critical infrastructure be considered an act of war?
Not all countries, not even all NATO countries, of course, have a sort of shared agreement on where that kind of red line lies.
These cables are supposed to connect us, but they've also become geopolitical fault lines.